Welcome to my series Vintage Toys. This one is part 6 and it's called Glowplug engines from Japan and Austria. And the first one that I would like to feature is the excellent OS FS60. This is one that I bought from a friend a while ago. It's not exactly in mint condition, in fact it was far worse than this a while ago when I bought it before I sold it to the friend that I've just bought it back from. I am not an expert on the dates and times when these engines were produced. I got my first example of one of these engines in the 1980s, and I think this particular engine is quite an early one. The carburetor is machined from a lump of aluminium. The cylinder head's not meant to be polished up, but alas, I polished it up a few years ago. I really am not a collector. I have a collection of various bits and pieces, but I'm not one of these collectors who needs the model to be perfect, needs the model to be in a perfect box in an imperfect world. If you're not familiar with model engines, this is actually a 4-stroke engine, a 4-stroke cycle model engine with a proper carburetor. In this clip I've slowed it down so you can see it working. I think this is definitely a Mark I FS60 because the other one that I have is different. This one is mounted on a display stand with a large wooden propeller. This engine is much more in its original condition. I didn't clean up the cylinder head, I've done nothing at it at all. And before I bought this, it had been stood as a display model for a long time. It's fairly dusty. Having a quick look back at the other one, look at the carburetor. You can clearly see the difference. This one has a cast carburetor, and the other one has a machined aluminium version. Also, the needle valve assembly is slightly different. It's not chromed. This one looks like it's been anodized. I don't really know whether there were any internal modifications to these two engines. In the past, I've flown radio-controlled model aircraft using both Mark I and Mark II models, and I never really noticed any difference in the power. The 4-stroke engines that I used to fly model aircraft with were nowhere near as powerful as the ones fitted with 2-stroke engines. These were the engines I used to use. This is a Webra 61. It's got the same cubic capacity as an FS60. Well, more or less anyway. But there, the similarity in cubic capacity ends because this Webra 61, a Webra Speed 61, is an incredibly powerful model engine. They were beautifully engineered. I think they were made in Austria, and what an engine they were. The earlier ones seem to have been fitted with this carburetor, or maybe it was an option. This is a standard aluminium machine carburetor. The later carburetors were called Dynamics, and they were quite different. This is how a Dynamics carburetor works. As you can see, as you move the lever, not only does the flat metal plate slide from side to side, it also has a mixture control valve in it as well. There were two major problems from my point of view with these Dynamics carburetors. The first one was, if you had an accident with your aeroplane and it plummeted into the ground at a very high speed, and while I think about that, I will be showing some aeroplane crashes at the end of this video. But anyway, from my experience, a Dynamics carburetor, when it plummets into the ground at 100 miles an hour, doesn't really survive very well. Sometimes, though, the carburetor would survive, but when you went to investigate the wreckage, you would often find that the slide had gone missing entirely. I never had a problem, but a few of the club members did have problems setting these up to make the engines run successfully. A few people would change the engines back to a standard carburetor like this one. Using Webra Speed 61s was fine in the 1980s, but then everything went mad, and now they are too noisy for general flying. I stopped flying model aircraft in the late 1980s when my daughter Charlotte was born because I realised I wouldn't be able to take any of my daughters down to the model flying club. It was far too dangerous a place. Once again, at the end of this video there are some examples of that. But it's not all bad news. That's how I got into miniature steam locomotives. This is a small Japanese engine. It's an Enya engine. And here, as a size comparison, you can see the difference. It's rare to see an 049 fitted with a muffler. A few years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to rejoin the Dewsbury MAC, Dewsbury Model Aero Club. So I arrived at the club with this model. It's called a Cougar 2000, and it's fitted with an OS FX46 with a small tuned pipe. But how the club had changed. There were very few of the original members there. Health and safety had gone mad, and everybody was flying hideous lumps of polystyrene with electric motors on the front. And as for the electric helicopters, well, I'll say no more. I'm now going to go back to the Dewsbury Model Aero Club in a time when it was fun. In the old days, I used to win the club competitions fairly frequently, and somewhere on these trophies my name is engraved. I have some small trophies that they'll let you keep. The annual Dewsbury Model Aero Club competition was in 3 parts, the first one being how many touch and goes you could do in a limited time. A touch and go is a takeoff and an immediate landing. The next part of the competition was called the spot landing. Whoever landed nearest to a mark on the ground won that part of the competition. Then there was a limbo competition where you had to fly underneath a tape tied to 2 posts. Watch this next bit. The man who was nearly killed by the plane is one of the adjudicators. I repeated the sequence because, alright, it's very dangerous, but it's also very funny. In every one of these clips, every model plane had an internal combustion engine. In this next clip, this was my old Magnatilla, a flare Magnatilla, and it used to fly very well. And here I am flying it. It was fitted with an OS FS40, that's a smaller version of the FS60. And although this old vintage type aeroplane wasn't designed to do this, it was quite aerobatic, because in those days I used to like throwing my aeroplanes around. I always used to spend the time to make the engines run properly by setting them up. Later on, I bought myself an OS FS80, and the FS80 was a new model, and this one wasn't very good. I fitted it into a very well made Graupner Piper Cherokee that a friend of mine built. This aircraft was very heavy, and it used to take off okay. It needed a good run to get it off the ground, but once in the air it sort of wound up, and by diving to build up speed I could perform some quite good aerobatics, which I used to do very frequently until this happened. Yes indeed, and that's what you get for throwing about a scale model that's not designed for aerobatics. The fuselage fell out of the sky, hitting an old mill roof on its way down. But the wing's descent was altogether more elegant, and it wasn't damaged at all, which is more than can be said for the fuselage. This was quite badly damaged. The engine wasn't broken, that was quite amazing. The engine was okay, the radio receiver was a write-off, and I lost a servo. But it was great fun. I really miss those days. And that's it for this video. I'd just like to say stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed the destruction. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.